And welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is the loop. Have you ever gotten stuck in one of those thought loops that just keep going round and round and round and round, and you keep triggering and re-triggering undesired emotion, and it just feeds on itself. So we're going to talk about that this morning and how we might find ways to extricate ourselves from the loop. And before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. It's great to have you here with us this morning, and everybody else who's joining us. Before we get started, we're going to just take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells and your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And let's take another deep breath in through your nose. And hold it. And this time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together and rub those palms vigorously against one another, feeling that friction, the temperature, the pressure, all those sensations, the tickling and the tingling, and allow all of that feeling, all of that sensation to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome. Whew, the morning yawn. Okay, so the loop. So this came about because last night I just found myself in this loop of actual resentments, just going back over certain incidents that had happened with family members, and every time I would think about it, it would trigger an emotion, and then I would find myself going into this whole justification thing in my head and defensiveness, and it just kept going around and around, and I was aware of it too, and saying, okay, enough of this. Let's look for magnanimity. Let's look for letting this go. And then what would come up was, yeah, but, and then it would go back in this cycle. And I was able, I appreciate that I was given the grace to be able to see this crazy pattern, really crazy pattern, because it was something that was beyond me in its way. It kind of had a life of its own. It wasn't reflective of my highest intentions or my intentions even. It's like it was some kind of automatic program that was running and running and running. And I got to see it, but seeing it wasn't enough to free me of it. Just being aware of it, it was like, okay, so I'm in this loop. Oh, excuse me. I'm in this loop, but it just kept on going like the ever ready bunny. And finding the justifications and all kinds of stuff. And then I would go to step back and say, okay, so what's underlying this? There was a sense of pride, a sense of protection, self-protection, self-defense, vulnerability, of woundedness, like all these different things are coming up, and then bam, I'd be right back in the loop again. And so I'm wondering if you guys experience this or have ever experienced this. I think that what happens a lot of times is that we get in these loops and we're not necessarily aware that they're there and that we're caught up in it. And this whole process of justification and self-validation. I was debating on whether to talk about resentments today because, that's what the loop was too. Anyway, the way that I got out of it was I finally just decided to do a session on myself, and that enabled me to detach. But it was really interesting to have this experience almost of being possessed, like realizing that there was something at work that was being really persistent in me that wasn't what my conscious desires were. And so it occurs to me that one way to break the loop in order to be able to go back and look at it more clearly at some point, because clearly this thing was going round and round. There was something there that was calling for my attention. And I was seeing the resentment and the attachment that was at play. But in that moment, I didn't really have a means to, it was too activated to be able to interact with it from a healing perspective. What I needed to do in that moment was just to get some distance from it, to free myself from it in some way. And I think, good morning, Bernadette. Good morning, Gia. Welcome, guys. It's great to be here with you this morning. We're talking about the loop, and the loop being this sort of brain worm that gets in your head and just keeps playing and playing and playing. And good morning, Lisa. Welcome. We haven't seen you for a while. It's great to have you here with us. Welcome. So these patterns that kind of take us over, where it's the same, it's like a tape on a loop that's just going over and over and over and over, not saying anything new, and just reactivating and re-triggering all these feelings. So what I was alert to in the process of this loop, which happened to do with resentments, was that there was a sense of pride, of not being appreciated, of being disrespected, of being disregarded, of not awesome. Lisa says, it's been a minute adjusting to my new normal. Yeah, so I think our new normal is in constant flux. So, adjusting to no normal or shifting ground, right? Learning how to dance on shifting ground. Anyway, I wish you inspiration along that journey, Lisa, of finding whatever that new normal might be. Anyway, so when we get stuck in these loops, what do we do? What do we do to remove ourselves from them? And then also find, I mean, what was present for me, what was really clear is that there's stuff that needs healing, that this was a big indicator that there is some deeper stuff going on that is calling to be addressed. And in the heat of the moment is not always the best time to address something that is calling for attention. When there's an open wound, it's not necessarily the time to be talking about what led to that wound being open. It might be, but in this particular case, to address it head on wasn't working, because it just kept reactivating all this really old pattern stuff for me. So, I was able to separate myself from it by doing a session around it. Instead of trying to use my conscious awareness, my intellect, or my conscious understanding to sort of move into the realm of, okay, this is clearly an embedded pattern. What can we do to relieve it for the moment? Just to get relief enough so that at a later time you can go back with some perspective. So Rosalind says, if your true self knows it's just stories, is ego loud and trying to cling to what it thinks is safe? Inner voice isn't so loud and is guiding as high or as fast as you want to go. So I love that you're saying that, and sometimes it's like the Rock'em Sock'em Robots. I don't know if that's before your time or something. It's just this toy called Rock'em Sock'em Robots that would just pound on each other. But sometimes those stories have tremendous power. And what was interesting is that I kept experiencing the visceral feeling associated with those stories. So it wasn't just an academic experience, it was a visceral experience that every time it would get to this certain point in the loop, the feelings would kick in and it would reinforce it, and then it just was off on a rumble and tumble again. So Rosalind says, is there a part of us that doesn't believe the changed self-talk, like it doesn't feel true? Well, that's actually a really good point, Rosalind. That's a challenge with affirmations, for instance. If you are telling yourself things that you know are patently untrue, at least in this moment, then it just erodes the sense of trust in oneself, because here you're trying to tell yourself lies, or trying to make too big a change in such a way that it's not believable. So in this case, it wasn't that there was the self-talk that wasn't believed. It was that there was just this loop that was playing. It was definitely old noise. But every time that loop played, it activated these feelings. And so step one in this case was to get some distance, to break the loop, break the chain, so that this pattern. It was sort of a self-reinforcing pattern to limit that, or to just cut it off enough to make it stop so that the negative feelings weren't getting reinforced. But it was powerful enough to get my attention, so that I recognized, oh, wow, this is still an issue. Things, that I've worked on, that I've believed were healed, things come up at another dimension, things come up at another level for us to address. Oftentimes we think we've resolved something where maybe we've just resolved a fraction of it and buried the rest, and then bam, it shows up like a whirlwind for us sometimes. So sometimes we can make the recognition for that place and say, okay, I get it, there's something here that is calling for my attention. And then we get to revisit it when the nerve endings aren't quite so raw, and we have maybe a greater capacity to bring love and love, forgiveness, acceptance, appreciation, bring that into the equation. Lisa says, for me, it's not that it's not believed, it's my head isn't used to hearing it yet. I feel it's almost checking to make sure it's true. And I'm thinking, Lisa, what you're talking about is the new self-talk, the new perspectives. And maybe the old pattern is so strong that it makes the new perspectives hard to metabolize, right? It's like, oh, wow, you're talking nice to me when you've been beating me up all these years. Now, what's going on? So it's interesting how we have these many dimensions of interaction with self, from all these different perspectives. So I get what you're saying, Lisa, is like, yeah, you really mean that? I'm a little skeptical. Let's test it and see how committed you are to this new vantage point. So the thing that in retrospect, thinking about this whole situation with the resentments, is I recognized that I wasn't falling into beating myself up for having those feelings or for being in the loop. I was recognizing I'm in the loop. And that's a huge step for any of us to have whatever feelings we're having and to allow them to be feedback rather than something that we then judge ourselves for further, which throws us deeper into another dimension of another loop, perhaps, if that makes any sense. So by allowing what's there to be there, by recognizing it, not compounding it with more judgment and more complications, to just recognize it. Oh, wow, this is what's going on right now. Interesting. When we come back to it, when we've gotten a little distance, perhaps we can cultivate some compassion around it. So in this case, there was a lot of emotion. And so what that indicates to me in retrospect is there is still a woundedness there. woundedness of not being accepted, of ultimately, I guess it goes to, a lack of self-love on some level, a lack of self-acceptance, because when we recognize that we're okay, really, really, then we have space for other people to be where they are, and we don't have to become so defensive in the face of it. We don't have to be making our case. We don't have to be justifying and validating and fighting. We can just be in a deeper space of love and acceptance of that person where they are. We don't have to make it about us, and we don't have to make it create this greater opposition. So Bernadette says, yeah, it's like doing something the same and expecting a different outcome. I think that's the definition of crazy, is doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. So when the mind chatter changes after years of same predictability, it'll take some time to change the nerves fighting back. I think, Bernadette, you're so right. We're just creating new neural pathways, right? And I think, there is so many years for me in my life. There are so many years of rage from in response to an experience of being deeply disempowered that it's so interesting, even through whatever evolution, these things sort of circle back. It's the spiral of change. Hopefully it's an upward spiral, right? Where we heal something and then it comes back around and there it is again, and it's like, oh my gosh, but it's not quite the same because we're at a different level of awareness around it. And it's this spiral of change, this evolutionary path of transformation, right? So, and it takes repatterning, and some of those patterns are so deeply entrenched. Seeing them is the first step for sure, like being able to recognize the pattern and recognize it with compassion, hopefully. Recognize it as a witness, as an observer rather than as a judge and jury kind of thing, just to recognize it as feedback. So Rosalind says, do we use truth for our own agenda? So the word truth then becomes quite subjective, right? If we're using truth for our own agenda, we're kind of picking and choosing what that truth might be, right? Rosalind goes on to say, do we stop talking to someone because of something we heard? That's a really good question, because that's part of what was going on here is, certain things that were said, being attached to those things that were said and attributing all kinds of meaning to those things that said, well, maybe I shouldn't be talking to this person. And so Rosalind continues, so the steps look like feelings, the actual sensation you are having. Look at the sensations. Sensations are the vibrations of consciousness. Little by little, the sense of urgency falls away. So Rosalind, I so thank you for that reminder that when we experience the feelings, when we experience the experience, it allows us to go more deeply into it. And as we allow that depth of experience, what happens is that energy does dissipate. And it was so interesting, with that perspective in mind, looking at what was going on for me last night. I wasn't able to identify that access point in that moment. to just say, okay, well, be with the feelings. Because the loop, it was really interesting. The loop was, think about the conversation, feel the feelings, create the justification, and then become aware of the loop and say, well, let's try to um to add some compassion. And then it went back into the conversation again, without the ability in that moment, without the perspective in that moment to actually feel the feelings. Because it was really a visceral feeling that certainly I could have, and I know enough to know that I could have just felt more deeply into the feeling, and that itself would have shifted the whole loop. It was almost like the loop wanted to perpetuate itself. So it was just going back around and around and around to create the trigger, the feeling, the trigger, the feeling, the trigger, the feeling, until finally I just said, okay, enough. I'm just gonna shift into another space to get some distance from this, so that I can come back and address it from a more resourceful place at another time. So I guess we have all these different devices, right? Like seeing the loop itself isn't necessarily enough to get out of the loop, which is maddening in its way, right? It's like, oh, okay, I see this, but boop, there I am again. And now I see it, and now, oh, there I am again. It was like the worst aspect of Groundhog Day, the going over and over again. And so what I recognize is that going at things head on is not always the best strategy, right? Going at things head on can create or exacerbate conflict. It can escalate conflict, or, like strengthen the polarities when we try to just address things head on. Sometimes we need a side door in. Sometimes we need to be more indirect, which is not my strength. So to be, it's interesting. I was listening to some change makers around our environmental crises, and they were talking about strategies and talking about how sometimes you just sort of have to drop something into the mix and let it have its own life, let it percolate, and rather than just taking it on directly. And I think that there's something to be said for subtlety, although that's a lesson I'm learning on so many different levels through my life. Like subtlety hasn't been my strong suit. So Bernadette says, how do you break the loop of your experiences coming at you negatively and you're exhausted and potentially numb? Yeah, so Bernadette, I think that that's really what we're talking about, is breaking the loop of these experiences coming at you negatively. Lisa says, mine either, subtlety not being a strong suit. So I think that one of the ways that we get to break that loop is first being witness. Being witness doesn't necessarily break it. That was my experience last night. You know, it's just occurring to me, and I didn't try it last night, so this isn't coming as a proven method, but it occurs to me that we could just go more deeply into it. You know, like if it feels like the world's coming to an end, maybe we get to consciously have the world coming to an end and just go deeper and deeper and deeper into it in a conscious way. And I think that maybe that will activate a part of ourselves that are like, okay, this is boring. I've had enough of this. That's one possibility. Another possibility is to be witness and to allow ourselves to feel the feeling, you know, like the more we resist something, the more power we're giving it. You know, the more we brace against something, the more we're embedding it. So sometimes maybe the thing we get to do is to find something that lifts us emotionally. I know when I was in a deep, 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 deep depression, that I would do all different kinds of things just to elevate my energy. So, you know, I'd be crying, but I would try to sing while I was in the shower, you know, so even if it was just the smallest increment of elevation, that was something. Other times when I was just in despair, I would go and do something that brought me joy. Like I really enjoyed taking photographs, being in nature, you know, observing the beauty. And what I'm finding is that beauty for me is a doorway, a gateway to being able to experience awe and wonder and gratitude. And moving into those spaces of awe and wonder and gratitude can break that cycle. You know, being able to move into this more expansive space. Gotta run, Lisa says. Have a marvelous day. Looks like it's going to be beautiful. Thank you for being with us, Lisa. Have a great day. And it's actually time to wrap up. So I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you to all of you who are joining us for these conversations. And may you find your way out of the loop. And then notice that the loop is there because there's something that is calling to be addressed. And so with that, so much love to you. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern, also the Enlightened World Network YouTube channel. And I encourage you to check out the other wonderful programming on Enlightened World Network, EWN One with the Earth, Enlightened World Living. And until next time, so much love to you and deep, deep, deep appreciation.